Awesome. So like I said, this is awesome that you guys made it to week 3. It's not easy to commit to something and to actually, continue to do it on a week by week basis. So I love that you're here and excited to continue on this journey with you guys. As we've been talking about, the goal of this series is the understanding that your thinking creates your feelings, and your feelings then dictate your behavior. And that also that it's possible to think differently. It's if you have a brain and a desire, then neuroplasticity will allow you to shift your thinking in ways that help you reach your goals with a lot more ease than when we go after just the behavior, using willpower and struggle. So that is awesome. Let me check I want to check the email, make sure everybody is able to get on. Nobody's having trouble. Yeah, looks like we're okay. Just Stephanie must just be having trouble with her internet. So anyway, we talked about how, and I really think this is important to keep in mind the bigger picture of this whole journey, which is, the 5 pillars of successful, effective weight loss, which were the self-acceptance and compassion, even while you work towards change. The second one being the habits, building the habits that support you and shifting out over breaking the habits that don't, and doing that in a way that works with your brain, doing that in a way that we know from neuroscience how we develop habits. And there's so much research around that. And it's actually counter to the way that we typically go about things, which is in an all or nothing manner. The third thing being aligning your thinking with your behavior, which is exactly what we've taken that piece out and we've really been focusing on that and that alone in this class. Building emotional resiliency so that you can become more aware of and process your emotions such that you don't need anything outside of you, whether it's food or alcohol or TV or shopping or doing whatever it is. And then the fifth thing, understanding your body, its needs, and how the nutrition that will best support you to feel good, have energy, not have cravings, and be able to release weight. So those are the 5 pillars, and I never talk about them without also talking about your nervous system, because the nervous system is something that's often overlooked. And when we try to just go after those 5 pillars and make them happen, but we do so from a dysregulated nervous system, meaning a nervous system that is stuck in the survival state, either because of past trauma, accumulated stress, both in most cases, reaching any goals is almost impossible. It's why you feel like, gosh, I've been working so hard. I've been feeling like I start again and again and again and can't get to where I want to go. And so our nervous system is often the reason why. So starting with a foundation of a well-regulated nervous system is always the best route, and really makes reaching those 5 pillars doable in a way that they haven't been for you in the past. So over the last couple of weeks, we've talked a lot about the fact that, our mind is constantly feeding us thoughts, and many of those are not helpful to what we want to be. Those were thoughts like losing weight's going to be so hard, or what's the use anyway? I'm always going to be heavy, or I have no control when it comes to food. All kinds of things like that create an emotional state and then a behavior that we don't want. And even thoughts that have nothing to do with food, right? Things around, oh my gosh, I'm so overwhelmed. Or, never going to find the right relationship, or things are, whatever it is that creates anxiety or stress for us, those kinds of thoughts can be worked with as well. In the same way that we're talking about working with our food related thoughts, we work with all thoughts the same. And then by working with those thoughts, we don't experience that overwhelm and anxiety. And so then we don't end up wanting the food. It's not about learning how to control yourself. It's about just not wanting it in the first place. So between, all the pillars I'm talking about in the nervous system, that's how you get to a point where there are no more fights. There are no more struggles. You just don't think about food unless you're hungry. And like I said, you learned how to work with your body. So in week 1, we talked about the importance of getting really clear and getting that awareness around what your thoughts are that are not serving you. And we talked about the fact that, sometimes they're not that obvious. They're, they lay they've been thought so many times, they're just automatic. They don't really come to the forefront until we look for them and until we engage with them. So hopefully you're still kind of uncovering with more and more clarity. What does my thinking that doesn't serve me, what does it look like? What are the words? All of those kinds of things. And that is, of course, the first step. You can't change thinking that you're not aware of. Then last week in week 2, we said there are some steps, some tools that you can use once you start to identify, this is the thinking that does not serve me. I'm getting closer now. I'm broadening my understanding, and I'm creating the thoughts that do serve me. And we talked about stepping stone thoughts, which are, our brain is not going to allow us to easily jump from whatever our thinking is to this optimal thinking that is, way over here on the spectrum. And so we want to move our way along to get to the kinds of thinking that serves us best. We want to move along the spectrum instead of trying to jump all the way all at once, because that's ineffective. Number one, we're not able to make that big leap. And then we're disappointed because we're getting nowhere. And so the idea with stepping stone thoughts is, hey, let me just get to the next best thought. What's a better feeling thought? Not necessarily the end all be all. And then work over time to get to that place. The other tool we talked about was evidence journaling, which is, we work with the confirmation bias that our brains have, which is if I believe something, I'm going to see all the evidence for that. And my brain is effectively going to not even notice all the evidence that's there, but that isn't consistent with my underlying beliefs. And I gave you the example of, someone who believes that all drivers are discourteous. They're going to see the people who cut the other person off and use their horn and stuff. The person in the same scenario, driving down the same street, the same highway, if their belief is people are generally courteous drivers, they're going to see the person who lets somebody over or, gives a little wave after, or whatever it is. It's just how our brains work. So when we understand that, we can capitalize on that and say, okay, if I consciously look for the evidence in my world that my old thinking is not true and my new thinking is, I'm going to find it, and I'm going to be able to, that's going to help my brain accept this new thinking. And then it's going to become my new way of being and interacting. And therefore it's going to affect my behavior in a way that helps me get to my goals. So I'd love a little bit of feedback from you guys, just to help me understand, and also to, anywhere that I can provide some extra support around, how did these tools work for you? Were you able to kind of work with them and think about some stepping stone thoughts that would work better to help you shift into that more aligned thinking? Were you able to find evidence for the thoughts that you want to think instead? And again, I love it. I'd love it if we have a conversation. That would be perfect. I've built in time to do that in this session. If you're more comfortable using the chat, that's totally fine. We can do that as well. So who would like to share anything about their experience with their thoughts, any shifts they're experiencing, any roadblocks they'd like a little bit of support around? Would be perfect time to do that. I know it's not easy in a classroom where, we haven't hung out a lot with each other and everything. So I get that. But it is helpful, hopefully for you and of course for everybody else as well, if there is anything that you'd be willing to share. I will say, some of the thoughts that have been coming through, there's been some people who've been sharing their journey a little bit. And one of the big ones is they recognize that in the moment they think, I have no control here. And again, this isn't something where they were aware that they were actually thinking those thoughts. But it was there nonetheless, kind of, those underlying subconscious thoughts. Gosh, I have no control. Why am I trying to fight this? I have no control. So we talked a little bit about, what would a stepping stone thought be to that? And, depending on where you are, that's going to be look a little bit different for different people, depending on what, your brain is willing to accept. But some ideas in that situation could be something as simple as, I've had a lot of experiences in the past where I didn't have the tools necessary to help me see that I had control. Something as simple as that can be really the start of a beautiful shift in perspective. And if that's, you may think, oh, that's so subtle. How could that possibly, really be meaningful? But it really starts to open you up to the idea that control is possible, that's not who I am. And so that's just one example that could be very, very helpful. Just that slight shift, in the past because we always want to acknowledge, right? We don't want to tell the brain, you're wrong, be quiet. That doesn't get us anywhere. The brain's like, really, we got to think about it in the place where, right? I mean, isn't that true with all of our relationships? If we think about having a relationship with our brain, I know it sounds a little bit strange, but if we think about it that way, say a teenager, right? Our brain is in a lot of ways kind of like a teenager who hasn't quite figured everything out yet. But if we, have a conversation with the teenager, we're like, nope, you're wrong. Obviously, we're not going to get anywhere. We're not going to be working with that teenager. And trust me, I've got my share of teenagers. Let's see, at this point, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, not quite teenage. So I know I'm talking about when I talk about teenagers and how similar it is to working with the brain. And if you have teenagers or know people with teenagers, kind of the way they can effectively work with them is a way that we can effectively work with our brains. So with respect to that same thought, I have no control when it comes to food, looking at some evidence journaling behind that, because obviously, most people will say, the first part of their day, like breakfast and, and often right up until evening time, they do just fine. And they make good choices. They feel good about them. They're not struggling with them a lot of times. And so that is huge evidence, right? That you do have control over food. It's not that you don't have control over food. It's that something is, you're needing something. And that's why food is coming in to serve a purpose for you. It really has nothing to do with the fact that you have no control, because you do. Look at all the evidence. So those are some examples just from the people that have been writing in about their experience. And another comment in the chat says, I was able to use the stepping stone thoughts. Awesome. I notice sometimes it feels like the more negative thoughts come back. Yeah. But I know it's a work in process, very much so. Yeah. The negative thoughts, it's, useful to think about our brain as being a protector, the really negative thoughts that feel the most dangerous, right? And so it's those kinds of thoughts that our brain feels like, I really need to protect her against this, because the consequences are big, right? So the more negative the thought, actually, the harder it is to overcome them. Not impossible by any means, but just want to validate your experience that, yeah, that's exactly how it works. The more negative ones are going to come back more and more, and they might be a little bit, just take a little more patience around, and that's totally fine. The fact that you're able to see them and able to see the process and how it's working, even if you don't feel like, gosh, I'm really clinging on to these new thoughts, or these new thoughts are really starting to plant themselves. At this point, even the fact that you remember, oh, look at this, I'm having the negative thoughts, there's something I might be able to do, like, that's huge. And then the comment, I plan to do more of the evidence journaling. It was tough the first time I tried. Yeah, it is tough. It totally is, because, it feels a little bit dangerous. And that's why the work with the nervous system as a foundation, before we start to do this work, you can kind of see how important it is, because your brain is if your system is in high alert, which I've said so many times, most of us are. A recent article in Psychology Today noted that 90% of Americans have had at least one traumatic event. And that traumatic event, it could have been when you were a baby, it could have been in utero, but your nervous system is forever altered from the trauma. And it's not to say that you can't work with your nervous system and have a very healthy nervous system that does operate in the parasympathetic or the rest and digest all the time. But you have to recognize where it is and what it would take to get there. And it's not hard. It's just something that, we don't pay that much attention to. But if evidence journaling is hard and the negative thoughts are very pervasive, your nervous system has a lot to do with your ability to establish new neural pathways. Because if your system is already in survival state, you're already having an experience of being in danger. So telling your brain, don't worry about those. Let's change it to something, a better thought. Let's look for evidence that shows that true. That is in and of itself intimidating. It's danger. And so if your system is not open and relaxed enough to accept these new things, that's why a lot of times, I'm doing the work, but I'm not getting anywhere. And your nervous system is a big part of that. Anybody who's going to jump onto the self-revolution classroom today happens to be the teaching about the nervous system. And so to give you a little bit more information about how important that is. And you can see just from the experience and from the people I work with all the time, it is the challenge, right? To establish new pathways, to stop believing the negative because the brain wants to protect you. The more entrenched we are in that need for protection in survival state, the more difficult the work is going to be. So it's not surprising at all. It's not, it's awesome that you're noticing that and that there's something that you can do and something that maybe you haven't tried yet, which is really exciting. So, yeah. So does anyone else have any other comments or anybody wanting some support around what could my new stepping stone thoughts be, or how could I use evidence journaling in a particular case? I'd love to support you in that way. Let's see, we do have a good chat here. I use deep meditation to help with the nervous system and changing my limiting beliefs. Yeah, it really works. Good for you. I love that you're sharing that. And I totally agree. I do a morning and evening meditation. Yeah. And it is, there's so many methods and modalities that can help us when we use them in conjunction, or finding one that really suits you and your lifestyle. It's not about like, here, you have to do this one thing. It's, it's really a kind of a personal thing. So learning about when you have the knowledge and the connection with your nervous system, then you can see what's working, how it's affecting me positively. And so it's a really powerful thing to be in connection with your nervous system, and the deep meditation helping with that. And actually, I love that you mentioned that, because the tool that I want to give you, and something in addition to, the awareness and the stepping stone thoughts and the evidence journaling that you can look into this week, is in fact visualization meditation. And it's really cool. I'm telling you now because you've already got some experience with your thoughts. You've already been working with them a little bit. So you might be in a really good place to add on to that practice. I want to read you something from another program that I created, because it's about overcoming thinking. And it's some really interesting research from Joe Dispenza, and not only from research that he's done, but also research that he's collected and to help people understand how this works. He says, I'm fascinated by how we can change the brain as well as the body by thought alone. Thought alone, changing the brain and the body. It's so fascinating. He said, think about that for a moment. If you focus your attention on specific imagery in your mind and become very present with a sequence of repeated thoughts and feelings, your brain and body will not know the difference between what is occurring in the outer world and what is happening in the inner world. So when you're fully engaged and focused, the inner world of imagination will appear as an outer world experience, and your biology will change accordingly. That means you can make your brain and body look as if a physical experience has already happened without having the actual experience. What you put your attention on and mentally rehearse over and over again not only becomes who you are from a biological perspective, it actually determines your future. So what he's talking about in essence is visualization, and imagination, and the studies are really incredible. And I encourage you, if this is interesting to you, Joe Dispenza's book, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, and also Supernatural. These are both incredible resources for showing you how powerful your brain is and how neurological pathways get set and broken. So it's a little bit, I don't want to say technical. It's not a hard read, but it is like a true scientific look at these principles that I'm talking about in a more, I guess, a more easy to understand kind of spiritual introductory way. So I want to tell you about a couple of experiments. One of them was a group of Harvard researchers. They took a group of volunteers. They had never played the piano before in their lives. They divided this group into two, and each, the one group had lessons, actual lessons, like, you know, like we would think of at the piano playing with the keys and all that. The other group could only imagine that they were playing the piano, and they weren't even allowed to move their fingers. And they practiced the same amount of time. And then at the end of the period, whatever that was, let's see, 5 days, 2 hours a day for 5 days. And they did scans. So it wasn't just, you know, something that it wasn't only the playing, they did brain scans. And that's something else about Dr. Dispenza's work and the work that he cites. It's like they use a lot of imagery and like tangible kinds of science to measure things. So it's so cool. But both of them had a significant number of new neural circuits and new neurological programming in the region of their brains that controls finger movements, even the group that quote unquote played the piano by thought alone. It appears that the wiring and firing that was done in their mind was enough to change the programming of their brains. It's incredible. They had, the other study was done at the Cleveland Clinic. So a very, reputable studies. 10 subjects imagined flexing one of their biceps as hard as they could for 5 training sessions a week for 12 weeks. And the subject's brain activity was recorded. And by the end of the 12 weeks, they had increased their bicep strength by 13.5% simply by using their imagination. It is incredible. And, Olympic athletes, there's a really big program that helps them do visualizations and imagery. And it's unbelievable the power that we have. I wonder why we're not all like spending half of our day imagining what we want. I've often thought, in a situation like driving the car or in the airplane or something like that, why don't I imagine that I'm working out, and be able to capitalize on that time? It's so fascinating, the power that we have through thought alone. So as you start to come into the new contact of, or come into contact with the new version of yourself, you can actually start to transform your brain and wire in the circuit necessary to live the life that you desire. We tend to think of the work to achieve our goals as like, it's gotta be force, it's gotta be effort, there's gotta be sweat involved. But so much happens behind the scenes in practices like this. And I really have found this to be an effective method to overcome particular behaviors that are being driven by thoughts. So I want us to think about the example that we've been kind of using, because I think it's the most common one that I hear. I have no control when it comes to food. So let's say we have a person, it's their experience that those thoughts keep coming up for them, and they've done the work on it. They are very aware of the words that their particular mind is sending out. They have, become tuned to when that is happening, even if it's on a subconscious level. They've brought that more and more into the conscious, and they see how it's playing out. So let's say that this is playing out for our example person every evening after, it's a long day. Maybe they had stress during the day at work. Maybe their nervous system is just kind of perpetually, stressed. And so you just get to the end of any day and it feels like a lot because of where we started from. Whatever the reason is, every evening, our example person is not hungry at night, but turns on the TV, has some wine, has some ice cream, has some, whatever the snack that their go-to is. And they're just struggling with that habit because they know that it doesn't serve them. They don't want to be doing it. They're frustrated by it. So they're working with their stepping stone thoughts. And when they're in the experience, or, even a little before they're in the full experience, they're thinking their new stepping stone thought that, yes, a lot of times in the past, I've not had the tools that allowed me to feel in control, but now I'm learning new things and my brain is plastic and it can learn a new way of being, something like that. They've looked at some evidence journaling. Wow, there were 3 days last week where I did not sit in front of the TV and have these evening things. That proves that there is a possibility. I've done it. I've seen it. I've experienced it. There's the evidence. So in addition, this person can really start to capitalize on what I'm talking about today, which is our ability to create new neurological pathways, even by our imagination alone. So what I'd like you to do is to think about a situation and just pick one. Don't try to overhaul your whole life this week with this one tool because that's overwhelming. And remember, a lot of us are already in a state of overwhelm much of the time because our nervous systems have not been, we haven't had the education to understand how to work with them on a deep level so that we don't feel that place of overwhelm much of the time. So just take one situation and maybe you'd like to choose one that you feel like would be pretty easy. Maybe you don't go straight for the one that is having the biggest impact on your life, but you save that one for, the second or third use of this tool. So let's just say for this person, they want to work on, that after dinner snacking in front of the TV. So what you do is you set aside a couple of periods this week, maybe every day if you have the time and the energy, 10 minutes, something like that. And you want to do it at a time when you're not triggered. So you don't want to wait until the evening when things are starting to build already. You want to do it early in the day before you're in that space so that because it's going to be easier for you to, number one, remember to do it. Number two, do it. And number three, for it to be effective, because when you're in that state, your nervous system, right? When you're going to sit down to do the thing that you want to, and you're saying, oh, wait a minute, I'm not going to do that. That's automatically going to put you in a state of stress and survival. And that's not the place where we're open. That's not the place where we create new neurological pathways. So we want to do this outside of the moment and find a little bit of time. If it's once this week, awesome. If it's twice, obviously, the more you put into it, the better. But do not think that a single, attempt is not worth it, because it is. A 5-minute attempt is once this week is worth it. So you're going to imagine with as much clarity what that situation looks like. You're going to imagine yourself, oh, you see the clock, it's 7:30. This is the time that I normally, sit down. You're going to imagine yourself either on the couch watching the TV in the scenario, or you're going to imagine yourself deciding whether or not you want to sit on the couch. Is this something that serves me? Maybe you'll decide to imagine yourself going for a walk or reading a book or connecting with a friend or a loved one, something like that. It depends on what your ultimate goal is. But even if you choose, I'm going to imagine myself watching TV with as much clarity as possible. And then imagine yourself doing what you want to be doing instead. So, oh, look at that. Here I am watching the TV. I'm, watching this particular show. Wow, I'm feeling so calm about food right now. Like I'm recognizing this is normally the time that I might, get up and start eating. And I'm just feeling really good about just sitting here and not needing that, and just stretch that experience out and feel the emotions of what that feels like to not be driven in that moment. And don't focus on the fight or the resistance part, but just focus on how good it feels that you're not feeling the need to do that. And what does that look like? And just really as much imagery and detail as you can pack into that visualization, the more those neural pathways are going to be built. So obviously, this is not something that you are going to do once and then see a major shifts. That's just not how our brains work. Remember, what we're doing is carving the path with these new things that we're trying to establish. We're carving a path through the jungle with a butter knife, or if you're using your tools, a machete. But nonetheless, it takes some time and effort and patience. So if you did this, let's just say you did this 10 times, and then you noticed on a couple of occasions, you were able to sit a half an hour longer before you started to think about food. I want you to recognize that as progress and celebrate that, because when we think to ourselves, this is the kind of thing that keeps us stuck is, oh, it didn't work. And then, I didn't have the immediate result. We live in such a quick rewards, instant gratification world now that we forget everything can't be that way. It doesn't need to be that way. And it's a beautiful process, even when it's not, because we're getting to know ourselves. We're learning a practice that we can use in every area of our life. So we don't have to be in such a hurry. I get it that when we're in a body that doesn't feel good, or we're doing things that feel like a little bit like violating to us, because we don't want to be doing it, that we're in a big hurry to shift out of it as quickly as we can, and we get discouraged easily. But when we recognize that that's the very thing, that mindset is the very thing that, number one, keeps our nervous system revved up, right? Because if you're like, oh no, I'm not okay the way I am, this is really bad, I got to do something. What's going on in your nervous system? Even if you don't realize it, even if that sounds dramatic, if that's happening, even on a kind of a subconscious level, your nervous system is registering that. It is getting those messages, and it is reacting to try to get you, it's going to increase your cortisol. It's going to do all the things that keep you wired in order to deal with that danger that's being presented through your thoughts. So in addition to the tool itself, I just want to remind you of that, of what we're doing here in, carving our new path and giving yourself, just the grace to do it. I guarantee you this is the fastest thing you will ever do, even though you feel like you're going snail pace, but at least you're moving, right? You're moving instead of staying in this spot right here. Maybe you're going fast, but you're staying in this spot over here because nothing is happening. So snail pace is much better than, the all or nothing, going back and forth frantically, never achieving what you want. So just, think about that and really, ask yourself, well, how's that been working for me? Right? Probably not very well. Let's see. Hi, Kelly. I'm glad you joined. I hope you'll be able to watch the replay, because we've gotten through a lot of really great stuff, but it's nice to have you here nonetheless. So this visualization, does anybody have any questions about how that would work, or what you might expect, or anything like that? Want to make sure you feel empowered to take this into your week and plan a couple of sessions. I think a lot of times, and I say this because it was my experience, I would listen to stuff and I'd be like, ooh, that sounds really interesting. Wow, people learn to play the piano just by thinking about it. That's incredible. What could I achieve? And then either because, living with a nervous system that was in high alert, you're just reactionary throughout your day. You're just getting done what you need to get done because it feels really important in the moment. And so you don't carve out the time that you need. And that makes perfect sense. And again, that's why the nervous system is so important. Or you're thinking, that's not going to work. I mean, yeah, it sounds great. Maybe you believe it for other people, or you're like, yeah, there must have been something. I don't have the dedication like they did to, work that they did that 2 hours, and I can't do it for 2 hours. So it's not going to work for me. Whatever the reason is, it makes sense. Don't beat yourself up for it. But now you can recognize those are just thoughts that keep me, right? These are just thoughts. Everything comes back to that. It's the thoughts that create my behavior. So your behavior this week, I want to do whatever it is. If it's literally a minute that you spend in this imagery, and you just start to imagine, wow, even if the only thing you do is say to yourself, I think it's possible that I could sit and watch in the evening or do something else in the evening and not feel like I needed food. That in and of itself is great. You've done something. You're starting that shift. So build on that. Maybe it is snail pace, but who cares? It's moving in the right direction. So just, thinking about that and thinking about what you'd be willing to commit to that feels really easy, 2 5-minute sessions. Is there anybody who would commit to that right now? I feel like I'm raising money. Anybody commit to 2 5-minute periods this week? I'd love that. And I'd love to, next week for us, Diane, yay.
12 pounds of fat from the most stubborn areas. In each of these cases, people reported being able to...
A little muting here. Perfect. Yeah. So, just trying it on. And then if you happen to do more, find more time, or you love this process, do more, but don't go into it with the expectation that you have to do, so much for it to work. It's really, everything starts to build and snowball, and, you're doing a little bit of stepping stone, you're doing a little bit of evidence journaling, you're having these 2 5-minute periods this week, or whatever you can put into it, and it all feeds each other. And then today, for, like I said, anyone who's coming to the self-revolution classroom, we'll get a little bit more about how you can work with your nervous system to allow these changes to actually take place. Because remember, it's not your fault that these things haven't worked for you in the past, whatever it is that you've tried. Part of it is you've had a mentality of it has to be all or nothing, and I have to be killing myself from progress for me to be able to make progress. And those things are, obviously just going to prevent you from getting what you want. And this other piece that I keep talking about, which is your nervous system. If you are somebody who's had a lot of stress, and you feel frequently overwhelmed, or just like you're going through the motions in life, that's going to make it hard to do these things. So don't beat yourself up. Be happy that, oh, there's something I can do that might allow me to do the things that I haven't done in the past. It does not mean I can't do them. It does not mean that I'm lazy. It does not mean anything other than I haven't received yet the right proper tools and support to be able to do it. So that's what's fascinating is understanding the different pieces. And when you bring them together, you can actually do the things that you've been trying to do, but now they're easy. So that is the tool that I want you to take into the week, and, continue your awareness and your stepping stone thoughts and your evidence journaling on whatever basis you can. If it's helpful to put these things up, I have had people, use whiteboards or other kinds of things where visually they're tying into their goals, because it's very common for us, like I've said, to just be going through our lives reactionary mode, feeling like I'm putting out fire. That's all I do is put out fires, as opposed to having the space and the capacity to think about these things. So that might be something you can think about as well. What would help me remember these things and connect to them? Yeah. So once again, I really want to congratulate you on showing up. You will see, as in every single program that anyone ever does, starts out with a group this size, moves down and moves down, just because it's, like, it's not easy. And when you really start to get in there, there's people who are not ready to look at their thoughts and to be engaged with what's going on. You know, it's a lot. So I congratulate you for continuing and for, you know, being willing to look and pay attention. That's really awesome. That's like 70% of the, that's a silly number, but it's a big part of change. And so you obviously have that, and I applaud that. And it's inspiring for me to see. So any questions before we wrap up, and you guys can go and put those times on your calendar when you think you'll have a few moments to just imagine and really try to focus on the feelings, how good this feels. Wow. Because when you do that, and we're going to talk about this more next week, that's those strong emotions help create neural pathways quickly as well. So awesome. Good, good, good. Okay. Since there's no questions, we will wrap up. And I just look forward to seeing you guys next week. Everybody's doing an awesome job.